who took all these wonderful pictures. It's a curious event today that makes sense only in my head, really. It was while I was researching my book on the history of comedy in Glasgow that I chanced upon Hugh's pictures. I mean, literally lying in a ring-bound folder, just tossed in a corner. Hugh had sent them the pictures some while back and they'd misfiled them, or they hadn't quite appreciated what they had. So while I was doing the book, the band that I was constantly listening to, or the band we're going to hear today, the Trembling Bells. So the whole thing is all tied up in my head. And I don't expect that to make sense to anyone else, but it provides a pretext to get Hugh here. And could I introduce Hugh? Hugh Hood.
All right, it's great to be here. You know, I never thought a year ago or 2 years I would I'd have an exhibition of the images, you know, because when I started in about 73, you know, I suppose as a street photographer, it was just something, you know, because I was working professionally as a studio photographer, and this was something at the weekends I would just go out with my camera and start wandering the streets of Glasgow. It was just as an alternative to being in the studio, taking images of whiskey bottles, fireplaces, sofas, you know, the typical things that would be photographed in a studio.
Yeah.
And it was Studio Swain, which was one of the biggest, probably the biggest commercial photographers in Glasgow. They would do work for Coates, which was based in Paisley. They made threads. They used to produce all these magazines for knitting. So they would do all the images, you know, of the garments made, so they could sell the thread. So, but lots of whiskey bottles, lots of exteriors of buildings. So it was really as an alternative to that, I started using a small camera and going out at weekends and just going for long walks and taking photographs. So.
But your father had an involvement with photography.
Yeah, when we lived in the Rotten Row, when I was there till I was about 12, I wouldn't say it was a business, but he would print the neighbours, you know, like the little box brownie films. He would process that and contact print it for them. And so he would convert one of the bedrooms and black it all out, get the chemicals out, get the, you know, the red lights, you know, because it just turned it into this sort of interesting kind of space, you know. So I used to go in and help him and turn the prints in the fixer and stuff, and so got really used to that smell of fixer from a very early age.
Yeah.
Which, if you've done black and white printing, you'll know there's always that smell in the darkroom, which is very unique. So that kind of, you know, it's probably about 7 or 8. I can't quite remember what happened, but he stopped all that, and so I wasn't involved in photography until my brother, when I was about 16, bought me a camera for my Christmas. And at that moment, it was a small 35mm camera. I started just taking pictures around the family and just outside. And one of the first pictures I did take, though, and it's not an exhibition, although I've got it on my website, was of Pinxton Power Station and the canal at Port Dundas where we lived. And that was probably, it only took about 3 pictures. I didn't know there were street photography type things, but, you know, and looking back on it now, there was obviously a little thing there. You know, I liked the landscape, I liked the, you know, doing the exterior photography. But it wasn't really till I went to Glasgow College of Printing and doing City and Guilds to become a studio photographer and getting really interested in what was going on in America in the 70s, which I don't know if you know anything about photography of that period, but, you know, Lee Friedlander and all these people were doing photographs, but it was photography which was completely different from what I was used to seeing. Particularly there's one magazine which was printed in London called Creative Camera, and it was unusual in the sense that it had no technical details whatsoever. It just had images and nothing about the camera, the lens. And I bought that one day and was really curious, and it really sparked my interest. And I think that was a catalyst for me getting more involved in what I'd say was street photography.
But when you were taking the pictures around Glasgow, was the mission for you one entirely of recording, or were you keen to achieve a degree of artfulness in the pictures?
I think initially it was recording because so much was going on. That M8 motorway, I started in Port Dundas, and I could see, well, I started in Rodnell, but then moved to Port Dundas, and then if you know that area, the M8 comes straight across, then it goes over Glasgow Road, I think, and then, by New City Road and all those areas, and that was being constructed. And although I never took any pictures of the construction, I did later on use that as a backdrop for some of my images. And I just felt you need to start recording things. I mean, I suppose in a technical sense, just, things were changing quite dramatically. And, but I mean, there was a sense of, bringing a bit of art to it, if you like, in terms of composition or looking for different levels of depth in an image. But initially it would definitely be just recording the Gorb. I can remember the first time I went to the Gorbals. I mean, that's the two little boys in the smoke. That was the first time I really went out with a camera to take street pictures, with a decent camera. And there's the two little girls sweeping the street, and there's that roll of film, which was definitely the first one that I really thought this is actually quite good. I'm really pleased with these images,
Yeah.
So that was a catalyst as well.
But when you were on the streets, presumably there wouldn't have been much of a photography scene or, at the time, any kind of precedent for that. I mean, there was the Partick Camera Club, which is the only thing I can think of. But I mean, how comfortable were people getting their pictures taken?
Well, I personally never had any instances of people objecting to it. I mean, there wasn't many people doing that. Having a decent camera, being on the street, taking pictures. I suppose it might be seen as a kind of waste, isn't it? Because it was kind of expensive film and processing, and I did it myself, and the cameras. So at the time, people would take family pictures, wouldn't you? I mean, that was a tradition. Wedings. I wasn't aware of any other clubs. I mean, I wasn't aware of the part. I know that they're quite well known now for do a survey. They'd all go out and do a whole survey of areas of Glasgow, which I wasn't aware of. I suppose aware of the Cerulli pictures, wasn't it? That I don't have a book, but I remember reading about him. But he's from the 60s, I think. So I did see a few of his pictures, but I'd never meet anyone else on the street with a camera. And there's only one instance where I actually have an image of another street photographer. There's a bit like from the film Blow Up, where years later you're looking and you enlarge something and you look in the background. And there was this guy with long hair, almost a reflection of me with a nice camera. And it was taken just, I don't know if it's in the exhibition, there's a guy looking at a giant sort of musical horn, the wind-up things.
Yeah.
And if you look right through the middle of that picture, there's a photographer in the background.
Yeah.
And I've never noticed that till very recently, that he was there. So there was other photographers, if you like, doing street photography, but I was never aware of it. And I suppose that's one of the things that's different from today, where the connections you can make on the internet quite quickly with people of a similar interest, whereas I don't know what we did in those days. I can't remember. I mean, I don't know how you contacted people,
Yeah.
So I mean, I had a lot of images. I would go home, process them, print them in the flat, and I have, decent-sized prints, So, but then you're always thinking, well, I'd love to share these with people, And
Well, that was the thing on the college course. I mean, were you entirely a lone wolf, as it were, or was it any process of consultation or sharing?
No, the whole course was purely technical. Photography was seen as you could be an apprentice and you learn the skills, just like a plumber or an electrician or a builder. And there is a lot of technique to it that you have to learn. But that whole side of it was, I think it was seen as a bit of a waste of time, really. It's because at the end of the day, you have to make an income from it. So they would see it. Certainly one of them, I remember, a guy, because they used to borrow their equipment, to be honest, and go out filming, taking shots. But they would. I don't think they saw that as any art or any kind of anything substantial to something recording for future, you know. Unlike, say, you know, in France they had Adje, the famous French photographer, who just recorded all the shops, you know, no people in them, and they became really famous images. So he actually thought about that. But yeah, I think I started to feel that, you know, things were changing. Well, you go back a week later and a building would be completely gone, you know, so the landscape, if you like, cityscape was changing all the time.
Yeah. There was no scene. You were working entirely on your own, and with no way of having the stuff judged.
Yeah.
And you tried many times to get an exhibition or to get the pictures
published by book. Yeah, I went after, I'd say maybe 76, maybe 77. I had enough images for a book, so I went to, I can never remember if the publisher was Collins or Blackie or something. It was on Cathedral Street. There was a big, I can't remember, but I did actually go in there and meet someone who could actually, who was responsible for photography, for the books, for publishing books. And he just didn't see a market for it. I remember him saying this, because these images, I mean, it's maybe 2 years old, maybe, you know, so maybe some of the things were still there. Maybe he didn't see that things would change. I mean, just have the foresight, I don't know. But he didn't see that as a business proposition to sell books that would work, you know. He said this, he liked them, but, you know, he didn't see any reason for publishing them, really, you know. So he wasn't, you know, he was okay, but he just didn't see that. I did try the Third Eye Centre at one stage, but that came to nothing. I mean, it's, you know, if you walk in the door, if you don't have any contacts, I suppose, or any background, if maybe I had gone to Glasgow School of Art, I might have had more doors open. But, you know, if you're coming from, I suppose, Glasgow College of Printing, and, you know, and I think it's very tough to judge those pictures at that time anyway, because, you know, it wasn't like in America where, you know, people were really taking an interest in that type of photography. And so I did actually try, and I think, you know, as you get on towards 78, then maybe doing less of it, you know.
But it didn't make you, the rejection didn't make you feel that you were on completely the wrong track, or that you weren't particularly good as a photographer?
No, I didn't. No, I thought what happened then, another college friend, he started a similar thing in Edinburgh, and one of the plans was to have a joint exhibition with Glasgow and Edinburgh, the two cities. So that went on to about 78. So we kept working on it, you know. And I suppose if you don't get any feedback, the chances are you sort of think, well, not really giving up, but, you know, maybe try something else, you know. So I would say I didn't take any pictures after 78 of Glasgow, not because I did actually move out to Lanarkshire by then for a year. So, so I'd say from about 73 to about 78, I was definitely active taking images, you know, taking pictures. Yeah, definitely.
And then from 80. You were in London. Yeah,
so I decided on a change of scene, and I went down to do a film course at the Polytechnic Central London, which is just in Regent Street, and I just chanced it. By then I'm almost like a mature student. I think I might be about 25, 26 then, and I got accepted, and that was a really great course. It was very practical. And although you had to do still photography in the first year as a general group, then you specialised in filmmaking. So that was quite opening, because there was a teacher who taught the theory, Victor Bergen at the time, who's actually a kind of one of these postmodern artists, but he's actually a photographer. He's in the Tate Britain. And he deconstructs all this photography that I was kind of doing in Glasgow, this idea that you can create documents which, you know, people can interpret, and, you know, it doesn't have a singular meaning. It actually it's open to interpretation, and depending on what the text is next to it, you could actually, you know, completely change the meaning of that photograph. So I went through a bit of that in London, but otherwise it was to learn filmmaking, still using film, you know, photography, and I've been doing that pretty much ever since, really.
So what productions have you been involved in that people would know about?
Well, it was, for a long time there was on Channel 5, the Impressionists. I don't mean comedians, I mean the painters, the Impressionists. So that ran for about 20 odd episodes, you know. Lots of arts-based programs which I still work on today. So that's, you know, artists like Andy Goldsworthy, who's based in Dumfriesshire, and he creates all this environmental art. So yeah, filming him over a period of time, maybe over a year, seeing what the work turns out, because all the stuff he makes is made from things that he finds, like branches, leaves, anything, and then he creates the structure, and over time it gets eroded away, and that's part of his art. So it's things like that. But I'm still very interested in photography. I collect, you know, photography books, you know, good photography books.
And how, I mean, are you still active?
Yeah, I've still got a camera.
London?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do that much now. I mean, I suppose what I'd really like to do, maybe come back to Glasgow at some stage and try my hand at it again, see if it's still possible, you know. I think it's only time that gives the images the currency that people get an interest in it, because sometimes at the beginning it might just see, well, anyone could have taken that, you know. So, but yeah, no, I'd love to come back and try that. I mean, there's nothing really stopping me, I suppose, but, you know.
And doing an explicitly then and now kind of
could be, yeah.
presentation.
I would love to see. I know some of them have changed out of all recognition, but I think some of the places are still the same, isn't it? I mean, it would be nice to do that. I don't know how, you know, if it's something that could get people interested in. I think that's the whole point, is that if you can, the great thing today is quite easily you get people interested in what you're doing, you know, because of the internet. There'll be similar people you could meet. And it's like, you know, and there was probably photographers in '74 that I could have met up with. There was a way of doing it, you know, to, you know, give each other a bit of feedback and help each other. But yeah, I mean, it's possible, you know. I'd still do that today. So
when you think back to '74, what's the dominant flavour of the memories of Glasgow at that time?
Well, I think all the tenements coming down was the thing that I remember. I mean, particularly there's areas where, you know, there would be whole streets, but they'd only take down certain parts of the tenement and leave a part. So it would look just so unusual if you were walking past that. You know, you'd think, this is, I know it looks quite obvious, but you know, you think that's got to be recorded. You know, I certainly felt that at the time. I'm trying to remember seeing if there was any images, you know, that any exhibitions at that time. I can't remember. You know, I can't remember. You know, but that was definitely there were certain streets that you walked down, and there was only parts of tenements left, and people still in the tenements. You know, and of course, children playing in the streets still. I don't know if you still see that now, but that was very common. You'd walk in, the children would be playing in the streets because there was maybe no electronics or no whatever it is, computers today. So, but yeah, that was quite different. You know, quite different. And of course, the underground has changed dramatically as well, hasn't it? You know, I got great access into their workshop at one stage to see how they do the repairs, you know, and the shipyards, you know. So there was a period when you would be let into places without it being an issue. I think now it'd be much harder to get access, isn't it? Because access, like in filmmaking, is everything.
Yeah.
If you can get access to someone, whoever it is, a musician, then you basically, you know, you can sell that on. So in those days it was actually much easier. You know, there was no didn't seem to be any restrictions. It was all possible, you know.
And of course, you also published a pamphlet on the tubes and the river.
Yeah, well, that was Café Royal Books.
Yeah.
So I suppose the story or the narrative is you found the images, and then you contacted Jeremy, Document Scotland, is that right?
Yeah.
Who's here today somewhere. And he then contacted me to use the images, and using part of you wrote the piece about that. And then Café Royal Books, who make pamphlets for photographers all over the UK, really good, great publisher. They said, could they use some of the images? And so far they've created 2 of them, which, you know, are wonderful. It's because the price of them means that most people can afford, you know, because most photography books are incredibly expensive. And he can see there's a great potential there for these photozines, or I think he calls them. And they're wonderful, they're great. I mean, he has them. There's a previous photographer came to the Gorbals in the 60s, and I think it was for Shelter, and there's a whole set of images that are really, really great images.
So how did life on the river strike you at that time?
Well, definitely, because one of my favourite places was to go to Govan, and go to Govan through sort of, is it York Hill Quay? I can't remember, and you catch that foot ferry across to the other side.
Yeah.
And that whole, because I used to live in Gibson Street, so I would walk that area to Byers Road and then head south towards the river, catch the ferry. So all the time you'd be taking images, catch the ferry across to the other side, and then you'd be in Govan. And it was just a great experience, I used to love it. But you could see the tenements that came right up to the river all being knocked down, And, obviously I wish I maybe in some respects had done a bit more, but, it's always difficult to know, you think you've got enough, but you go back 1 week and a building's completely gone,
Yeah.
So a bit like, across the road, isn't it? I mean, I was surprised to see that getting knocked down, but, it happens once they start, that's it, it's we knock them down, so. But yeah, I really liked the river. Possibly a third one coming out at some stage. So
on what?
I'm not quite sure yet, but I think he said he's got enough for 3. So.
Which is the other question? How much is left in the archive?
Well,
How big is the archive?
Oh, well, I think there's 60 odd pictures in the gallery next door. I've got a lot more than that. I think I've got a few hundred that I could put my hands onto straight away. But there is some missing at the moment. I know there's still lots missing. So it's got separated. I'm not quite sure where they are yet. So I've had a chat to my brother. He doesn't seem to have them. So, but there is boxes of stuff where when your parents die, things get moved and boxed and put aside. And I think there's definitely still some out there. But I'm going to have to try and find them.
Well, has the search been stepped up?
Yeah, it has been. Yeah, it has been searched. He said he's looked through everything. So there may be some other packages, and someone else in the family has actually got them. But yeah, I think I've got a lot of the ones that I've got exhibited here are ones that I've certainly printed most of them before, so I knew those ones. But there's some that I haven't printed before, which is great to see them printed now. So, but yeah, I'd say, there's got to be at least, I got 250 maybe good images out of, there's obviously a lot more than that,
Well, it must be singularly frustrating to know that you've taken these pictures and that people are beginning to, 40 years on, are beginning to appreciate what you did then, and there's more of it, you just can't find
them. Yeah, it's a bit of a worry because because they are actually of great interest, to me and to other people now. So I'd definitely be stepping it up the looking. I just need to contact, maybe my sister might have them in Newcastle or somewhere like that. Because what happens when it all kind of it gets broken up and people take different things. So actually, nobody knew the negatives were in those files. When I went to London, I never did see them again till whatever it was, 20 odd years later. More than that, that's what we're talking about, 2006 or something. So from 1980. So it was quite a difference, to suddenly come across them. It's only because it's interesting because I bought a film scanner. You had to scan them in. And, you kind of forget what you've done, really, after that period of time. And even about a month ago, I found some images which are here, which I'd never actually ever seen before printed, So that's quite Red Road Flats, for instance, in my wandering, what I used to do was I'd pick an area and go and photograph it, So whether it was Begovan, Red Road, Brigton Cross, the Gorbals, you'd pick that and went there maybe for a couple of days at a time and try to cover it and get as much as you can out of it. So it was. There's quite a lot of Glasgow, There's a lot of Glasgow there, and hopefully they'll turn up one day. But anyway, I was scanning those images in, and I had to. I had a knee operation, so I couldn't do anything for about 2 months. So it was great just to be sitting there, taking the time and doing that,
Have you photographed any other cities in depth?
No. My wife's Indian, so I've been to India a lot, and but I take some pictures there. But I've never done it in that over a great period of time. Years. You turn up in a place and try and do some shots for a couple of days. But I've never had that body of work ever. I think so. I'd love to, as I say, come back and try something if it's possible. But
and the one thing I'm particularly interested in, Hugh, is what in your mind was that collection of pictures once you've moved on, between moving on from it and them being found again? What kind of trace did it leave in your mind? Did you say, that was my great creative contribution and I blew it, or by circumstance it got blown?
I think when I went to London, it was almost like I started another life in a sense, because then I got married, I've got 2 children, and the whole thing, growing up. So it's only when I rediscovered them, it reawakened it all, It actually reawakened my interest in still photography again, Even though at the time when I was scanning them in 2006 or whatever it was, or 2005, I can't remember, and I was just putting them up on a website, for anyone to look at, and I got a lot of great feedback, a lot of great emails coming in. There's one woman who discovered her grandmother, there's 2 old ladies looking through a shop window, I think it's in there. And I get this email from Canada saying that was her grandmother and her best friend Flo or something, So I've got lots of emails, people coming in. There's another story of who was a woman police sergeant, and she recognised this. It was an Italian family, and they made plaster figures, whether it be Robert Burns or Jesus, and there was this cat that she had bought off the guy, and it's in the photograph which is in there, and I've got a still of the cat as well that she bought, and she has a great email describing how she came across the image, and all that time later she actually bought the cat and took it home, so, and it's still on her shelf, but she can see it in the image in that photograph in the exhibition. There's lots of things like that. I mean, a lot of reminiscing, people remembering an area, which I think is quite good. I think that gives it a lot of more depth to the photograph when you have a backstory, if you like, a narrative that goes with it, kind of locates it a bit more, So what I'd love is to have more of that and have that for each image almost,
Well, similarly, as a final point, you were saying that you believe, as a child, that you were photographed by Mark Cerulli, which is a really nice connection of the lineage.
Yeah. In the book, Shades of Grey, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bit in the Rotten Row. It's a funny-looking building. Now, I'm not in that image, but that building we lived in for a while. And I remember, I think it would be the late 60s or 60s at some stage. I remember me and my friend getting a picture taken by this guy who had kind of Rolleiflex, I suppose, because I remember him looking down into the camera. And it was only later when I saw that image, and it sent this memory back to that time that man was doing this street photography. And I asked my brother, who's older than me, and he said, yeah, he did come in and photograph around the building. So I'd love to see that archive, because I find that if I could search it, I might find a picture of me from the 60s, So whatever, it would be quite good, wouldn't it? So, but yeah, it's definitely he took shots in that building which we lived in. So, and there's other kids in the street there. So that would be a good connection,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Which the strange thing about Glasgow is Glasgow photography is the history of the role of children in it, which is something that's very big, particularly in your pictures.
Yeah.
But your pictures are very different from Mark Cerulli's. Mark Cerulli's are quite sweet and sentimental and fond, whereas yours were a lot more clinical.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. It was more, as I say at the beginning, it was to record the event or the landscape or the cityscape, more as I suppose an investigator. You're kind of, I don't know, making a social comment on something maybe. I wasn't looking for the pretty, but kind of trying to record it as a document, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I never tried to contact whoever I was photographing. I mean, that might sound a bit sort of cruel, but you know, I felt I wanted to be detached and record it, you know. Whereas there's people who'll say you have to, you know, live with people for a week before you start taking the camera out and taking the picture, you know, almost as an anthropological sort of study. Whereas I felt you could just, well, what I find when I'm making films, say if I have to go somewhere to Africa or India, I find if I don't really get it in the first few days, then I get so familiar with the place wherever I might go. Those first few days I'm seeing things all the time. But by the third and fourth day I stop seeing that. You know, it becomes very straightforward. Whereas in a brand new place, I have to have the camera and start shooting straight away. Because those first 2 days are crucial to get the... If I have to wait any longer, then visually it becomes so familiar to me that I don't see it any longer. You know, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah,
you know, because that's the idea that, you know, it's taking the familiar and making it unusual. I mean, almost like the surrealist things, you know. If you can see situations like that, you know.
Yeah.
Great photographers can do that, you know. That's the thing.
Well, I think most of us here would agree that you've done that for Glasgow retrospectively. That the pictures here are a place we all know intimately, but are completely rendered different by the passage of time. And it's been quite moving for many people who've seen the pictures, and it's an amazing thing. And it's amazing that 40 years after you were so determined to get an exhibition of these pictures, that it's finally occurred.
Yeah, no, it is.
So better late than never. Hugh Hood, thank you very much.
Okay, sorry.
Allan mentioned these two photo books which we have in the shop there. They're only a limited run of 150 each, and they've been flying off the table. So do grab one of these. Another reason that we're here today is to
Oh yeah.
on Allan's new book, The Glasgow Smile, A to Z. Money is sit here now, as I said.
Yeah, should have asked Allan about some of these. Yeah.
Sardonic grin himself. Allan, I'd just like to thank Allan for catalysing this in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The exhibition out there. We had shown bits of Hugh's work before, and it's taken about 3 years to get to this point. But it was after reading Allan's piece and documents got on the site that really made me want to kind of hurry up and do something with the work, and it's just the tip of the iceberg, I think.
Yeah.
So Allan is here, obviously. You want to buy that book, you want to get it signed, as well as these. So we're going to move on because we've got a tight schedule. But before I encourage you to go out to the gallery foyer and have a look at Hugh's work, and if you want to ask Hugh any questions you can, I'd like to invite a friend of Hugh's to the front who's going to sing us one song about Glasgow. So I'd like to welcome.
Okay. Can I just say I'd like to thank Allan. I'd like to thank Allan personally, because actually I think the whole thing actually was, you know, he was the catalyst for this happening, to be honest. So I mean, the story of finding, because I don't know if maybe I've mentioned it, but after I'd scanned all the negatives in and got it and had it on my website, I thought, well, it'd be quite nice for the Mitchell Library to have these. So I contacted them and they said, great. So I sent all the higher resolution files to them, everything you see there. And I thought they'd be on their website or something. And it wasn't until Allan contacted me and told me that actually was it photocopies or something? So it was, you know, they could have lain there for another 30 years, couldn't they? You know, so what I'd say is that really Allan is a person to thank for all of this. I've got to be honest, you know, otherwise this would never have happened. So I've got to thank you, Allan, and
pleasure.
Good. And you must explain to me what the Glasgow Smile is. What is the Glasgow Smile?
It's an injury.
All right. Okay. Oh, that smile. All right. Okay.
Also known as the Chelsea grin.
All right. Okay. I thought. Okay. Glasgow humour. Okay. I should have known that, shouldn't I? It's just, you know, when you get to my age, you kind of forget things, you know.
Well, that's anglicised, the Chelsea
Yeah, it's a
grin.
soft Chelsea, whatever, yeah. No, that's absolutely.